John Safran.
Shalom, how are you?
I'm fine, it's early here in the morning. How are you in Australia?
Good, it's late in the afternoon, so I'm at the point of the day where I haven't worked enough and I'm feeling lots of guilt and regret and self-loathing.
And for me, I feel a little bit,
You've got the whole day ahead of you. Anything could happen. You could work really hard and feel good about yourself. It's too late for me, though.
Well, you have 8 hours until midnight.
Yeah, I guess so, yes.
All right. First, I would like to say that I'm deeply honored to have this conversation with you, John. I have a deep respect for you, and you had a deep impact on me with your programs and your view of religion, humor, and rationalism and all that. But we're coming back to that later, but first, the biggest maybe question of all, who is John Safran, if you could tell the listeners who maybe doesn't know you that well?
Sure. I'm a television documentary maker in Australia, but, with a bit of a comedy twist to it. So people might look at things like Michael Moore or some things from, Sacha Baron Cohen or a bit of Louis Theroux, and they'd say, oh, John's kind of in that kind of area where I kind of go out into the world and, into strange worlds and overseas and try to understand other cultures. And because it's a TV show with segments, the different segments have different flavours to them. Sometimes they're pretty straight documentary, but it's a bit like the weirdness is I've gone into this strange world and I play it pretty straight. And then occasionally, but now that I'm getting old, much less often, occasionally it's like a bit, of a gag, like, a bit like sometimes Michael Moore or Sacha Baron Cohen will go in somewhere and sort of fake being naive about something so they can, get a reaction out of someone. So there's a bit of that too. And, and generally the topics I obsess over are things about, so far have been about like religion and ethnic identity and, And so they're obviously delicate areas that are kind of really good for if you're a comedian, because straight away the audience is like, oh, no, that's serious. So, yeah.
Yeah, we'll put up some link to some short clips on YouTube or something so people can see.
Although, I guess if I'm saying who I am, for the last while, I haven't been doing TV at all. I'm actually just finishing a true crime book. Where I spent 6 months in Mississippi following a murder case, but that's all tied in with ethnic identity too, because it's a white supremacist who was killed by a young black guy. The young black guy says the white supremacist made sexual advances on him, so it's got all the usual themes that I'm kind of really interested in, and it's just like in a new form, I guess.
So this is sort of a sequel to your second show. It was called Race Relations or something?
Yeah, well, no, it's just it's a book. It's going to be a true crime book. So
okay.
So it's just a totally different form. But I've still got it's not totally serious. It's got a bit of humour and strangeness in it. Yeah.
Okay. First, I have three quick questions that I ask all the victims of these interviews. Yes. Classical music or rock?
Oh, what do I prefer?
Yes.
Well, I always try to educate myself because if I don't understand something, I don't usually think, oh, it's because that thing's stupid. I always think like there's something wrong with me. And too many really smart people like classical music, and I just think, oh, I'll try to understand it more. And so I ordered off eBay. I ordered the 19 vinyl records secondhand of Wagner's Ring Cycle, and just listened to that and tried to understand it. I briefly went out with this girl who's was into classical music, so we used to go to a few little things, and I really like trying out things that aren't kind of in my comfort zone. So I kind of appreciated it really, and I'm sure as I get older I'll understand it more. But ultimately, when I'm much more likely to listen to a Beastie Boys record. So and also I kind of understand. I can hear the difference between good and bad rap music, for instance, or even like good and bad Beastie Boys songs. It's like, oh, that one's a better one, that's a worse one. Whilst with classical music, it all just sounds kind of pretty good to me. You know, I'm like, oh, I'm just impressed they're all playing those instruments and stuff. But like, if you held a gun to my head and said, oh, is this the London Philharmonic Orchestra, or is this the Sweden blah orchestra? I'd be I just wouldn't know. Like, so I clearly don't have an ear for it yet. But you know, I could in the future. Sorry, a bit of a long-winded answer. Although for the last year I've been listening to Hank Williams, which is like country, but that's kind of rock, I guess, because he's trying to get in the mood for writing my true crime book, because you know he's from the South and my book was in the South, so kind of helped as a background thing as I was typing away.
Coffee or tea?
Oh, coffee, definitely.
Good.
Yeah, get a real buzz out of it. You know, I've probably had about 5 today, at least. So, yeah, no, coffee.
Sounds like a normal day to me.
Yes.
Is it like Australians are, as descendants of the English people, more into tea, or have you sort of rejected that part of your colonization?
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I've heard that houses here, I don't know if anymore, but that they've been built the wrong way, because when people came to Australia, they just kind of based the houses on, you know, how they should be built in England. But, you know, Australia was a harsher land. So, yeah, it took us a while to kind of figure out that, you know, maybe we should do things a bit differently, seeing we live in Australia, not England. But, yeah, I'm not sure about the tea thing. But, yeah, no, lots of people drink tea.
No. Well, here in Sweden, even if we were very close to England, we are actually the biggest consumers of coffee in the world. Next to Finland, maybe. I think we are more or less the same. So it's
and do you have, like, do you have royalty in Sweden?
Royalty?
Yes.
Yes, we have a monarchy here.
A monarchy?
Yeah.
And how does that all work?
Well, it doesn't work. They don't have any power at all. Actually, if you are a little bit harsh about it, they have less power than the ordinary citizen, because they are not allowed to say how they vote and that kind of stuff. So they are more or less just, how do you say, like a figure for Sweden. So they travel around the world and greet the leaders, but they can't do anything at all. So,
but you know, it's still kind of good, what do you call atmospherics or whatever. Like,
yeah,
you know,
yeah, sure, and it's quite the king house is or their family is about 300 years old. They're descendants of Napoleon.
Wow.
So we are actually quite French in our the house of the king here in Sweden, and the queen she's French. No, she's German, I mean. So we have a mixture here. But we have a prime minister, so it's a democracy more or less. So,
sure.
And we don't have that right and left wing thing. Everybody is liberal. They call themselves right and left, but everybody is more or less the same.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of a simplification, but...
We're always told to look up to Sweden. All the progressives always look to Sweden and at how things work there and say, well, this is the case for being progressive because it works so well in liberal culture. It works
very well, and I'm very proud in many cases to be a Swede, because we are come rather far when it comes to things like gay rights and all that kind of stuff. So here it's nothing at all. Why in America people would freak out if they heard the things that we have allowed here. All right, the last quick questions before we get into the deep ones. The city or the forest?
The city or the forest? No, I kind of want to run away to the forest, but just the way my life has unrolled, I've always been in the city. And so, I always make plans. Like for instance, now in my book, it's like, as soon as I finish the book, then I'll run away to the forest. But it never happens, because then some other thing will start. But yeah, I have to get out of the city. But you know, there's lots of temptations. You know, it's a bit like getting out of the city is like trying to kick yourself off Twitter or something. Like you always end up just back there, and you know. So yeah.
Do you have forests in Australia? Because here in Sweden we have deep forests. The whole country is a big forest.
Oh wow, that sounds really great. No, there's definitely forests in Australia, but I'm such a city person, and I've always been that. Yeah, I'd probably need to Google it. I know mainly there's forests in Australia because, whenever there's a serial killer, they end up in the forest. So there's definitely forests because I see them on the news all the time.
Okay, because my view of Australia is more or less either it's a big city, like a modern country, or it's this desert-like landscape where we can see Ayers Rock and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's got both of those, and also forests, because it's like Australia is like as big as, like it's huge, so it's like a whole continent. So
yes,
depending on where you drive your car out to, you'll either get a forest. It depends what level you'll end up on. It's a computer game, whether it will be forest background, desert background, or city background.
We can skip the next question because you have already talked about the book, so that was good. So, cut there. Your show, John Safran vs. God, is, according to me, a masterpiece. It's very clever done, full of humor, skepticism, and a lot of thought. Could you just, in short, tell the listeners who might not have seen it what it's about, and how did you come up with the concept of the series?
Well, I'd worked on a few other things beforehand, and I found out that no matter what topic I was told to cover, I'd end up doing a kind of, usually like some weird religious angle to things. So, for instance, I did a music show, and the thing I was most interested in was things like the Christian music industry, and I was interested in rock stars and their religious beliefs, like Prince being a Jehovah's Witness and Beck being a Scientologist. So I was kind of told to go off and do a music show, and somehow done a religion show. When it was, so then I thought, I really want to look at religion, particularly because in Australia, religion, at least back then, like it was filmed around, 2000 and, the year 2000, and actually, no, a bit after. It was filmed after, after September 11, and Australians just aren't that into, like, religion that much. Like, we don't do God, and, like, if you're a politician, even if you're conservative, you're sort of like, you're not going to get any friends, really, by kind of banging on about religion. It's sort of like, people are, like, respectful. Like, you do what you want, so I decided, this is a really kind of good topic because people don't talk about it. And they certainly don't talk about it in a funny way on TV. So it just seemed, I'm interested in this. And I was also interested in it because of my upbringing, where I was brought up Jewish in a country that's not Jewish, obviously. But then my parents weren't that religious, but then they sent me to the most religious Jewish school in Australia. So I was like the least religious kid in the most religious school, and everything was mad. And my grandparents were passionate Jewish atheists, like cultural Jews, where they loved the Yiddish language but were against religion, and so everything was just like confusing for me. And like when you're an artist, you kind of base your work, I guess, on things that have kind of like built up in your head over your life. So yeah, I had to blurt it all out, all those contradictions. And I did notice that after September 11, lots of my friends were like, because they knew I was kind of into religion, they were like, what does this all mean? And because it really forced everyone's hand. Like suddenly you couldn't just not know about religion. Suddenly, you had to sort of, have your mind across it a bit. So I just thought, I'd kind of tap into that, I guess. Does that answer it, or have I?
No, it was an excellent question, and I understood a little bit more about your background, and it reminds me a lot of Sweden, where many people have some kind of belief, but more or less everybody says that they are non-believers.
Yeah.
And we have a state church, but people only goes to it when they will have their child baptized or something. So we are a very confused country when it comes to religion as well. So we are very, how do you say that English word, ambivalent when you,
ambivalent, yeah. Like the guy who's the opposition leader, who's considered very conservative, and he's very Catholic. Like, he even studied, I think, in a monastery. His name's Tony Abbott, and everyone's saying he's going to win the next election. And even though he's conservative and that's his base, and he still, like, plays down, like, religion. Like, he probably, unlike America, you know, when the president wants to be elected and they totally fake and exaggerate how Christian they are. Like, oh, yeah, go to church all the time. I can't tell you how far I'm in church. And you can tell they're kind of exaggerating. Mm-hmm. In Australia, it's like the opposite. It's like if you're someone like Tony Abbott and you go to church all the time, you're constantly sort of like downplaying it. Like, he probably is way more of a religious obsessive than he's sort of like letting out to the Australian people.
Do you have like Christian Democrats or a party like that in Australia?
Yeah, we sort of do, but we do, and again, it's a big country, so there's lots of different scenes going on. But it's probably not so much that the Christian lobby doesn't have a voice. It does, and it has its influence, but so would the World Wildlife Fund. Like, I'm not. It's sort of, the Christian lobby here is sort of like an other group that would have a voice, as opposed to, you know, like in America, where it's like, wow, you better not annoy the Christian lobby, or else they'll be able to get you voted out. It's just another group that, and they do come across as in the mainstream, but being like like they have to be really careful because they're slightly, if they try to like overplay their hand, they know they're just going to look stupid because they're not going to get what they want. So they're sort of very kind of careful about how much they kind of make a big fuss about demanding something in public from the government, because they know they probably, you know, like, there's probably a lot they're not going to get. So there's lots of like symbolic things that they get, or, you know, like, oh, we want funding so we can have clergymen in schools or whatever, chaplains in schools, and they'll kind of get that, and the atheist groups will kind of be annoyed that they've got that kind of funding for that, but probably like, you know, real big ticket issues like, hey, we want to make like, there's no chance abortion's going to be made illegal. There's no, just all those real things that they realise they don't have enough pull for that. Having said that, with like gay marriage, it seems like they've got a hand in stopping that going through. Seeing lots of Australians don't seem to have a problem with it, and it just seems like the politicians might be saying, I mean, you'd have politicians who just sincerely were against it. I imagine Tony Abbott, who I was talking about before, I imagine he's sincerely just against it, so that's one thing. But amongst the other ones who are playing politics, they are probably thinking, oh, I just don't want to lose any votes, so, you know, I'll try not to annoy the Christians, so I'll go against gay marriage and blah. So, anyway, it's a messed up country. It's a confusing country to try to figure out.
Well, it sounds a lot like Sweden in many cases. And we have the same thing, because we don't have any... We have the Christian Democrats, but they only have like 2%, so they will probably be kicked out in the next election. So it's champagne. Well, the ending of this series, to come back to that track, it was quite controversial, and many questions was raised about what happened with you there, because you have 7 episodes where you were mocking and trying out, well, not only mocking, but it was a lot of fun and playing with the religions. But the ending, something happened there. There was an exorcism.
Yeah, there was I went and got exercise. So this guy was really good. He either hypnotized me or exercised me, and I kind of just got lost in it. And and I thought it was most effective by leaving it up in the air. Like, I just gave it to an editor, and that's how he edited it. And yeah, people got really thrown by it, because they're like, oh, where's the bit where you explain it all? And you know, sometimes it's good not to explain it all. Like, sometimes it's good to kind of have some interaction with your audience where, I don't know, there's, you know, it's not comfortable, and there's a bit of friction. And I definitely think that's what happened there. But possibly, I took it too far, because like people got really upset, and like I'm not like you know, I'm not like a sociopath or a psychopath. Like, I'm not happy if people are like upset by things. Like, you know, that's why you're a comedian, because largely you don't want people to be upset. So I was a bit kind of thinking, this got a bit out of hand, because I got like teachers contacting me the next day saying, listen, I had a girl come to school and she was crying because she didn't know what happened. And I was like, oh, Jesus. And it was like, yeah, all weird. And a couple of mental health organisations complained to the TV station saying it was likely to upset people who were mentally ill already. Huh. And I had a parent of a mentally ill kid who was saying that the episode upset them, and well, not upset them, but now their mentally ill child thinks they're possessed by the devil, and it was like, oh Christ. So it was like, yeah, it definitely got out of hand, and like the fact that you're asking me about it, 10 years later is just like yeah, it's like this thing that just every week someone will ask me about it, and I've done lots and lots of things, and it's definitely the thing that most people keep on asking me about. Which
you briefly said he exorcised. How do you?
Yeah, hypnotized me or exercised.
You said maybe he hypnotized you. You just touched that word, and I'm a little bit into hypnotism as a magician. That was very interesting. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, well, the thing that obviously, because we have to cut it down for a half-hour show, so one of the things we have to cut out is every time he exercised/hypnotized me, there was usually like about 10 minutes or something where he's like lulling me into this state, but we only had 25 minutes or whatever, so we cut all that out. So that probably looked more kind of dramatic in the cut, like he's just like tapping my head and then suddenly but it was good to scream. I'm very pro exorcism. I'm just against it if they're sort of ripping people off for money or something, like all that thing is not good. But it's really just an excuse to kind of flap about and scream. So, that's good. It releases a lot of tension.
That was
people say, oh, well, you can flap around and scream without having this religious dimension to it, but, sometimes you just shouldn't micromanage things. If people are, like, enjoying flapping around and screaming and there's a few prayers around it, like, that's that. But it was a pretty, as I showed in the episode, it was a very confusing scene. And I guess one thing that's kind of about my work is I'll go into a place and all these awkward and weird things will happen, but I'm not like and I like to show them because I just think that's the truth, and I have this fear, but not even that's the truth. It's like I have this feeling that's interesting, but I'm not like a doctor or a scientist or all these other things. So I guess that's the contract you kind of, the audience member kind of signs off on if they watch my work, is that I'm going to present like these worlds that are often confusing, and I'll let people say things, but I'm not always going to have the total answer to them. And I don't know what I'm meant to do about that. Like, for instance, in this episode, it was fascinating, and because you had women who were there because they'd been abused and they felt a devil had come in on them whilst being abused, and it's just shocking. And like, so I kind of like showed at least one woman like telling that story about, and it's just like such a complicated and thing. But I think to myself, well, that's something like I've got into this world and I've told this story, her story that usually isn't told that way, and then maybe I leave it in someone else's hands to try to connect the dots.
Because I always thought, or when I watched this John Safran versus God, that this was sort of a gateway to a second season or something, when you were coming back to this, what happened in the last episode, and maybe traveling with Bob Larson, what his name?
Oh, yeah, so, Bob Larson.
And maybe mocking that kind of stuff, or doing sort of a deeper look into what happened to people that are being sort of... because he's doing this as a profession. And are they people that are really mentally ill, and he's trying to drive the devil out of them when they really need a good psychiatrist or something like that. But, well, maybe you could come back to that in the future, or maybe you have left that... Well, was there ever any plans for a part 2 of John Safran vs. God?
Well, I don't know. It's like after you get exercise, it's a bit kind of hard to kind of go, okay, I'm going to come back with 8 other episodes and I've got to top getting exercise. So I imagine like I'll still be, I'm still like obsessed with religion and ethnicity and stuff, but it's just sort of like I'm infusing it into other bits, like like I say, like a true crime book, but it's kind of like a true crime book about race. So yeah, I imagine like all the themes I could revisit, including exorcism. Like I've read so much about exorcism because I don't know why I was so obsessed with it, but I was just obsessed for a while, even after I did the exorcism, where I like I'd order these books from these Italian priests, translated into English, where they claim that they've, done exorcisms and this is their diary. And so, yeah, maybe I probably need a co-writer or a psychiatrist to explain to me why I'm so interested in that. But, yeah.
Oh, very nice knuckle cracking there.
Oh, sorry about that.
No problem at all. I'm just treat myself soon. So I do that way too much. Now you're doing a radio show with Father Bob. How did you start working with a priest on a podcast or a radio show?
Well, I first met him whilst putting together John Safran versus God, that show we're talking about, and it was really as simple as my manager at the time. He said to me, he goes, "Oh, listen, John, you got to meet this priest if you're doing a show about religion, because my manager at the time, his mother was really old and had to take his mother to this church in South Melbourne, and he said, oh, the priest is just like, John, you've got to see him." Anyway, I didn't really listen to him. But then later, a second person, like a lawyer, said it to me. They said, "Oh, I heard you're doing a show on religion. You've got to see this guy at this church." And I was just going, well, when do you ever hear like two people telling you have to see a priest at a church? So yeah, I rocked, and the church happened to be around the corner from the production company where I was working. So I just walked around there at midday and sat in on mass, and he immediately recognised me and started doing jokes, and you could just tell it was just like hilarious. It's like everything he says made me laugh. And when I went out, I filmed with him on and off for about a couple of weeks for John Safran versus God, and when we had to cut the story, we constantly just had to cut it so finely, because every time he said something, I just laugh. So, which is kind of good. I mean, so good on the priest for that. And so we've just sort of kept it going. So that was for a television, but then now we've got a radio show once a week, and he's really popular with young people. I don't know why. No, I mean I know why, but he's like, he's like a grandfather everyone would want, I guess, or a family member everyone would want, because he's sort of like warm-hearted, but really sarcastic, and a priest, but kind of offensive, and so it's kind of it's really good, and he's good to bounce off. So, because he's kind of interested in the same things as me, so we can just blab to each other about things, and then we can scream at each other, which people like, because I don't know, like we're like the judges in the Muppets who are up there and just screaming at each other or something.
Have you changed your view of religion today? Because when you are watching versus God, you, at least in the beginning, come out as quite agnostic or atheist or something. Have you changed your view of religion since doing that series, and since you have been working with Bob for quite some years now?
Well, I reckon I've kind of tuned up a bit on what is problematic about religion and what isn't problematic, and I'm more practical these days, where I just say, well, is it doing harm or isn't it doing harm? Certain aspects of religion. And so, obviously that's a bit subjective, but still, you can still make a call. So, rather than sort of getting tied up in knots and like, well, if I'm hassling the Scientologists about believing in something irrational, why don't I hassle the Australian Aborigines for believing in Dreamtime and blah, and just getting caught up in all these complicated things? Rather than that, I just look at things and saying, well, is this act that this person's doing in the name of religion, is it harmful, or is it not harmful? And then if it's not harmful, then, I'll leave it alone. And then if it is harmful, then it's something to be criticised. And, so I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. I don't have any, I must have these answers.
I specific in like a small L liberal country like Australia, it seems like the more harmful aspect of religion, or where it's more prone to be harmful, is when there's like little isolated communities, like whether it's an isolated religious Jewish community or a Muslim community or an Aboriginal community. That's sort of like where the leaders of the community kind of like cut off everyone from outside eyes looking in, and so they're really like open to, you know, exploitation of the weaker members in the community, and, you know, all sorts of things from being ripped off financially to child abuse, and, you know, so that seems to be sort of how recurringly a problem with religion in a kind of liberal country like Australia is, like, just making sure there's checks and balances, and that there's, you know, if there's someone young or weak in a cut-off community, that they have, you know, ways of escaping, I guess, or alerting the outside world that they're being abused or whatever. So, yeah, that seems to be a sort of a big problem in Australia, or, you know, the problem, I guess. Right at the moment, there's a Catholic Church. There's a government inquiry, a Victorian government inquiry, which is the state I live in, where looking at abuse in the Catholic Church, and it's just it just shows that what horrible things can happen when, like, a religious group is sealed off from, you know, being having any checks and balances.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was John Safran. I encourage you to watch his show, John Safran vs. God and Race Relations, and I will also put up a link to his current podcast with Father Bob. It's very funny, and he takes up very good subjects that I really encourage you to listen to that. John Safran, I want to thank you for coming on this show, and as you usually say, go to hell.
Well, thank you very much. The only thing I'm not thankful for is I'm looking at my nose. I don't usually look at myself, and whenever you do a Skype call, you have to look at yourself, and I'm thinking my nose is actually elongating and becoming larger as I'm getting older, which is not good news, because it was already quite large when I was a young lad. But now I'm 40, and it's like it seems to be getting quite bulbous. Oh well. Go to hell. Oh well.
Isn't it like the nose and the ears that are said to constantly grow throughout your life? I don't know if that's true, but...
Yeah, I think it's looking bad news for me. It looks like that's happening. Oh well. There you go. I guess I'll just have to be good at writing books and give up my dreams of being a professional male model.
So you're 40. I thought you were only like 35.
Yeah, no, I'm a very youthful-looking 40-year-old. It's pretty depressing. That's why I became a writer, because I thought that's more respectable for my age group. You know, like people accept you if you're like a 40-year-old author, but if you're like a 40-year-old, you know, jackass prankster running around town, everyone's like, grow up, you know.
Well, I would love to see a new show where you're pranking people, even if you're 50 or 60. I think you could pull that off. So,
Yes, thank you very much.
could I ask you to just say that wonderful end line, "Go to hell" or something
Okay.
like that,
Yes.
as I could use as a good ending for this interview.
Okay.
So I'm just going to say, John Safran, thank you, and then we're cutting to that. All right. Once again, John Safran, thank you very much.